Section 1.4 is just a really basic introduction to proofs, and two-column proofs in particular. They start with the definition of what a theorem is. And what a theorem is a mathematical statement that can be proved. Now in this book, if it's called a theorem, they'll show you within the section how they actually went about proving the theorem. Otherwise, they'll call it a postulate, just something that's given and then assumed and used as we use the proofs. We'll be using lots of theorems this semester and next quarter in order to prove our proofs. One of the first theorems that this section gives us is Theorem 1. And that is, if two angles are right angles, then they are congruent. And that should make sense because if you have right angles, and we know the definition of a right angle is 90 degrees, and if there are two of them, then of course they should be equal, therefore congruent. Theorem number 2 is very similar. It starts with if two angles are straight angles, meaning 180 degrees, then they are also congruent. If we look at the first problem, we're given the following, that angle HJM is equal to 20 degrees, and HJK is equal to 110 degrees, and angle OPR is a right angle, and the diagrams on the side. We are going to set up a two-column proof, and to do those, you always have two things. You have your statement, and you have your reason, and you kind of just divide it with a line down the middle. The first things you always are going to do is you're always going to start with your givens, which will be stated at the top. You can do this all at once, or else you can do it separately. First given is angle HJM equals 20 degrees, and the reason for that is given. We're going to use the second given, which is angle HJK equals 110 degrees. And again, our reasoning is simply because it is given. And then finally, we'll use the third. Now, once we get to more complex proofs, you can either put all of the givens right in the beginning of your proof, or you can simply use them as you go. Now that we have our givens out of the way, what we can kind of think about is how are we going to get to the conclusion? The conclusion being angle MJK is congruent to angle OPR. And if we think about what happens, if we use subtraction, we can get angle MJK to be 90 degrees. And again, the reason is just because of the subtraction property. And if we know that angle MJK is 90 degrees, then we also know that that angle has to be a right angle. And the reason is, if an angle is 90 degrees, then it is a right angle. And this is the definition of a right angle. Now, for the beginning of this book, I would like you to get in the practice of writing an if-then statement, because most of our theorems throughout the book will use that format. Once we get to more longer, complex theorems and proofs, then you can go ahead and shorthand it. But again, for right now, I'd like you to practice writing those out. Now, since we just made MJK a right angle, we can go ahead and use our first theorem and go right to the conclusion of OPR is congruent to angle MJK. And again, the reasoning is our first theorem. If two angles are right angles, then they are congruent. Again, this is a very basic, straightforward proof. They will get more complicated, but this is just for you to get the hang of your two-column proofs and how to write your reasoning.